The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with, even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Yes, realize, not just think about. Experience it. This is what our practice is about. To experience that true nature, that true mind, and then to let go all of the conditioning, the habit patterns that surround our impossibility or seeming impossibility of experiencing it. To let go the habit patterns of greed, anger, and delusion that keep us trapped in suffering. And to open to that true mind of awareness, that incredible freedom from our stuff that cannot even be described, in which, when we experience it, radiates out and illuminates other people as well. Everything experiences that true mind when we experience it. So today is day 2 of this 7-day sesshin here in June 2019 at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico. And I'll continue with sharing some of the teachings of very, very deeply realized Chan master, Chan being the Chinese way of saying, what we call Zen in English and in Japanese, meaning meditation, actually. It's called Soen in Korean. And this particular book is called A Bird in Flight Leaves No Traces. A Bird in Flight Leaves No Traces. And that is actually how it is for us when we have deeply realized our true nature. We are able to move seamlessly through life without leaving traces. It's not sticky. There's no residue, because we are free of our conditioning. We are free to not have to indulge in anger or frustration or irritation or any of the other things that leave traces in this universe of energy. Science has discovered, really, that we are energy. And it makes sense then that as concentrations of energy, whatever experiences we have, whatever we make of these experiences, is transmitted throughout that whole energetic field, that limitless energetic field. We recite Bodhisattva vows, the vows of the Bodhisattva. A Bodhisattva is a person who chooses to come to awakening in order to realize that true mind and to let go, as part of that realization, the habit patterns that keep us cycling in a realm of suffering. And in order to help ourselves move in that direction, we make vows. And the first vow is, sentient beings are numberless. I vow to let them all go. And sentient beings, we might originally think are other human beings, other thinking beings. And to a certain degree that is true. And what I've just said about when we let go, it's felt by others, both seen and unseen. But there's another aspect of this letting go. And that is letting go of our ideas of who we think we are and all that goes around that self-image that has to be maintained and defended. And when defended to a certain point, with some people, ends up, they become murderers. There have been so many mass shootings in recent years, some of which have been done by people who are mentally ill, but by no means are all of them in that category. There are people who have felt that they were being wronged when they were being let go from a company, for example, when they were being fired from work, and enraged at what felt like a deep insult on their self-image. They got themselves a gun and went in and killed many, many people. This is the extremity of this need to maintain and protect a self-image. In other manifestations, it is the woman who stays in an extremely abusive relationship because she has somehow begun to assume, either because it's been told to her over and over again, that she deserves it and she's not able, capable, worth anything else. It's another version of a self-image. Self-esteem. Where is this self? Where is this self? So we come to practice sometimes out of suffering, and sometimes out of a deep perplexity. Is this really the way it is? Or is there something more? And if there's something more, it seems important to reach it, to open to it. We may not have any words for it, and in fact, really words can't describe it. But something brings us to practice. And the practice is a challenge for pretty much everyone who undertakes it. We have to have faith that it is something that is worth doing, that we really will reach a place of freedom through it, that we really will find our answers as a result of it. Because what people don't generally realize when they start doing Zen practice is that the opening that happens in our mind allows us to see where we are caught in delusive thinking, in negative habit patterns. And most of us are pretty invested in not seeing those things. People get embarrassed, they don't like it. People get insulted, they don't like it. Because it's an affront to that self-image. And yet, if we're truly to become free of where we're caught, it's important to see where we're caught. We can't just have it vanish. Wouldn't that be nice? Suddenly we're free. At the moment of awakening, there is that sense that suddenly we're free. And the freedom is beyond any description. Any description is quite puny compared to the experience itself. And of course, how deep the experience is, and there are varying depths, will make a difference in how free we really are and how long that freedom lasts. Because we have a choice. We can continue opening, and as part of that, continue letting go our habit patterns of greed, anger, and delusion. Or we can enjoy that brilliant flash of insight, that beautiful experience of sudden freedom. And if we don't nurture it, and if it isn't deep enough, if we don't let go what's keeping us from being free, that insight will be nothing but a faint memory. There was a man who came to Mitra-roshi in the 1960s. He had been in the invasion of Normandy. The invasion of Normandy just had its anniversary. this year, just a few days ago actually. It was a turning point of the Second World War in Europe, and it was an extreme experience of massive death and dying. And this man somehow survived it and returned to New York City, where he was living before the war, and was so caught in the anguish of how can this happen in humankind? How can there be this destruction of human beings, this suffering, this anguish? He was so caught in it that he couldn't do anything but wander the streets of New York City, and he was so caught in this question of why that he would bump into light bulbs, and this went on for about 6 months, and then suddenly one day he opened into an awakening experience. But having no way to deepen it, no way to continue the work that's essential after Satori, it finally faded into a beautiful memory. But obviously it concerned him that it was such a memory and it wasn't the reality anymore, that he sought out Kapla-roshi. Roshi told him that if he did Zazen, he could probably bring it back, but he was never heard of again. Doing Zazen is not something that people generally like to do, exactly because we're opening to where we are caught in order to be able to let go those caught places. Plus, I mean, it can get boring. Your knees can hurt, your back can hurt, you're sitting for hours. You're not going out and doing all kinds of fun things instead. Somehow in Rochester, which is a pretty gloomy place to live in general, I think there's something like 3 weeks of sun a year, according to a talk I went to out at the university where they had just built a solar house, passive solar house, and they were explaining about, even with only 3 weeks of sunshine, you could still do a certain amount of heating and energy relief through the sun. Well, with only 3 weeks of sunshine, there's an awful lot of the other end of the spectrum of weather. And somehow, every sesshin, particularly in the summertime, well, only in the summertime really, because there was not much sun in the winter, but in the summertime, every sesshin, there would be sunshine in the sesshin. But as soon as you got out of sesshin, it was gone. You'd miss this whole few days of glorious weather because you were closeted behind basically curtained windows and sitting looking inward. But it was worth it. It was worth it. So let's start continuing with the teachings of Huang Po, the 9th century Chan master, really, but this book actually is a translation by a former American monk in Korea, Robert Buswell, who is a professor at ZCLA. And also there's a modern commentary by a Soen master whose name is Subul Sunim, Sunim being an honorific. Let's see where we are with this. We've done the preface yesterday. And let's begin with the teachings. The master said to me, Peishu, Pei Shu was as you heard yesterday, he was a government official who was a student, a serious student of the Chan, and had met Master Huang Po and periodically invited him to reside in monasteries that were near wherever he was assigned to be an official. And he would spend a great deal of time asking the master questions. And the master kindly guided him. The master said to me, Pei Shu, all the Buddhas and sentient beings are only the one mind. There is no other Dharma. Since time immemorial, this mind has never been produced or extinguished. It is neither green nor yellow. It has neither form nor characteristics. It does not belong to the categories of either existence or non-existence. It cannot be measured in terms of new or old, long or short, large or small. It transcends all limits, measures, names, traces, and comparisons. What is right in front of you, that is it. But if you start to think, you will be far off the mark. Let's read that once more. This is exactly what we're searching for, but there are no handles to it. And that's part of the challenge. All the Buddhas and sentient beings are only the one mind. Everything is this one mind. And normally it's spelled with a capital M because it's different from our cognition. Well, it's not different from our cognition because it contains all things, everything, including our delusions. So how can we factor that? We think of the mind as pristine, as clear, as free. So how could our delusions be part of it? This is the same question that the monk asked Joshu, another eminent Chinese Chan master. Does even a dog have the Buddha nature? A dirty dog? One of these things that runs wild in the forests and streets and snatches food when it can? Even that has the Buddha nature? It's worth taking that perplexity deep within yourself beyond words and not letting up until you have an answer. All the Buddhas and sentient beings are only the one mind. There is no other Dharma. Dharma means phenomena. Since time immemorial, this mind has never been produced or extinguished. How can that be? It is neither green nor yellow. And we could say it's not any color, and yet it's all colors. How can that be? It has neither form nor characteristics. It does not belong to the categories of either existence or non-existence. It cannot be measured in terms of new or old, long or short, large or small. It transcends all limits, measures, names, traces, and comparisons. What is right in front of you? That is it. But if you start to think, you will be far off the mark. And we in the West, basically, pretty much all around the world, except for a few specific places and a few specific cultures, are taught to think. And we in the West more than other places, we in America more than other places, I say America, including Canada and Mexico, we are taught to think. We're taught to solve problems by thinking them out. Other parts of the world, Europe in particular, and Asia, you're not taught to think, you're taught to memorize and then spew back, word for word, what you've heard. So if you have a question, you look up the answer because it's been memorized, and it's a rote memory kind of thing. You just memorize it and spit it back out again. Thinking has its advantages. Creativity can come forth out of it. But creativity is not born of thinking. Creativity comes from a deeper level in our minds. And this deeper level of our minds is beyond words. We assume, and we're taught basically, whether specifically or by implication, that we've got to think in order to solve problems, in order to live. How can we live without thinking? And yet, when you take a tiny child, not yet at a point where the brain is sufficiently developed to the point where they can technically think, and yet they function. They eat, they sleep, they poop, they pee, they laugh, they cry. My first memory is when I was about 6 months old. How can that be? And I remember it very clearly. My mother was standing with 2 other women about her age. She was holding me. One of the women had an infant in one of those English-style baby carriages that had springs. And she said to my mother, "Why don't you put her in the carriage? Why do you stand there and hold her? Why don't you put her in the carriage?" And so my mother put me down in the baby carriage with this other infant who was probably somewhere around 2 to 3 months, was lying there. And I remember both how unsteady that was, feeling rocking around, trying to keep my balance, sitting up. And I also remember trying to communicate with this tiny infant who was also in the carriage, and being so disappointed that this infant didn't respond. And I wasn't communicating with words. I had no words. I was not communicating with sound. I was communicating in another way that everyone communicates in, whether they know it or not. We don't need words. They're very useful. They serve a purpose. They aid communication. Interestingly enough, there's a book out called The Shallows, How the Internet is Changing Our Brain. And the man who wrote it goes all the way back to ancient Egypt, where there were hieroglyphics, and how sentences were all strung together in terms of their writing. And so it took an educated person who was educated specifically in reading those hieroglyphics to translate them into sound and to be able to read them. But without any pause, any indication of pause, any periods, any commas, any question marks, any exclamation points, or what sufficed for them. There was nothing like that in original communication, written communication. And so only scribes, educated scribes, could really read. And wealthy people could hire scribes to read for them. And so only the elite had much of a vocabulary. Eventually, sentences came into being in the sense of differentiated sentences in whatever language. And until the time of movable type, when printing books became inexpensive enough that it was many more people had access to being able to read. Until that time, apparently language consisted only of about between 100 and 200 words. And suddenly it burgeoned. And of course it is continuing to expand. Their dictionaries are getting thicker and thicker and thicker. But in order to find out who we really are, what the true nature of reality is, which is what, when we experience it, when we come to recognize it, come to be enlightened to a point where we can comprehend it, it cannot come through words or thoughts. A word may trigger it, but explanations can't reach it. Thought can't reach it. So our searching has to be beyond words. And it's a rich and deeply fulfilling way of experiencing, way of searching, way of living, really, in a certain way. And it's effective. How long it will take depends on how caught we are and how much time and energy and concentration we put into the search. But the possibility is there for everyone. The more intuitive we are, the easier it is, because we're accustomed to living beyond words or experiencing beyond words. The more intellectually compelled we are, the more difficult it is, because we're so conditioned to depending upon words that we keep wanting to take refuge in those words in this search. But the search is beyond words. And yet it can bring us to the most incredible freedom, including the ability to use words freely and creatively. So we're not giving up words. We're not getting rid of words. We're just recognizing that there's a different tool we need to use in order to find this incredible experience. So on that note, I leave you to dive in and to search, because you will be rewarded if you continue, if you persist, if you allow yourself to embrace open arms, whatever comes up, whether it's unpleasant, whether it's joyful. And probably most important is to work with an experienced teacher, because you can mislead yourself pretty seriously. There's a lot of false seeming Kensho experiences, seeming Satori experiences, seeming enlightenment experiences that really are not genuine. And if we think we've had one, we're leading ourselves quite astray and robbing ourselves of the opportunity to have the genuine, truly freeing experience. So I thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows, and we will return to Huang Po tomorrow again.